Hello again and welcome to the channel. All popular evidence to the contrary, perhaps, I actually am listening and reading the comments that you make. And one of the right honorable viewers of this channel asked me about McKay's book on Sovereign of the Seas and what did I think about it. So instead of just straight answering this question, I decided that it might be worthwhile doing a brief review of some of the popularly and easily accessible information about the ship. Sovereign of the Seas is one of the more interesting of the 17th century warships. It is popular subject of models. It also has very interesting detailed history. I have already commented widely about why people always model Victory only as she was at Trafalgar when she was so much more beautiful before. For Sovereign of the Seas, it is exactly the opposite. Everybody models her as she was in 1637, instead of how she spent most of her life after her cutting down, and also being renamed Royal Sovereign. The ship was built under the orders of King Charles I of England. We do have quite a bit of the history of the vessel well known, and it is extremely interesting to see how varied the interpretations of this ship are, mostly among 20th century people. The American shipmodeler Hendrik, known best for his maintenance of the Rogers collection that is now in the Museum of the Naval Academy in the United States, wrote very scathingly of her that she was essentially garbage, that she was the most expensive, overly decorated and useless ship ever built. Interestingly enough, the Dutch who encountered her in battle in the mid-17th century did not appear to think so, because they called her the Golden Devil. And allegedly, though I have not been able to track this down to the specific occasion, she sank a Dutch ship with a single broadside. However, we can, continuing the interpretation, was she a good, was she a bad ship? Is there any truth in Culver's statement? And I immediately jump the gun and tell you, absolutely not at all. I have very low opinion of his knowledge and treatment of history, historical models and historical sources. But returning to the Sovereign of the Seas, no lesser man than Prince Rupert of the Rhine, one of the foremost, most experienced admirals in this period, shifted his flag from the brand new Royal Charles to the by then really old Sovereign of the Seas in the campaigns of 1673 during the Third Anglo-Dutch Wars. In fact, he went as far as writing in a letter to his royal cousin, King Charles II, they were first cousins. To him, Prince Rupert wrote that the Sovereign, or the Royal Sovereign, is the best ship in your Majesty's Navy. And that, considering how much battle experience Rupert has, let's not forget that he's the only admiral in the history of the sailing navy who had managed to keep a squadron or fleet in being for 4 years without secure naval base, without money and without reinforcements. No one else ever has managed to achieve this. So this is not a man whose opinion we should take lightly. There is another testament from no lesser man than Samuel Pepys, who admittedly was quoting one of the numerous Pett clan of shipwrights, who was aboard Royal Sovereign, again in 1673, as Prince Rupert was taking her down the Thames River to join the fleet and move on to fight the Dutch. And the pilots refused to take her down the river because she was too big, too hard to maneuver, they believed, and they believed that the wind and the tide are not serving. Rupert, never the most patient or diplomatic of men, got bored, got fed up with this, kicked the pilots off the ship, and sailed her on his own down the river. So allegedly, he turned to Pett and said, Master Pett, what will you say about this? Tacking the ship downriver against the wind, beating into the restricted waters of the Thames estuary. He said, "What do you think of this?" To which, again, allegedly, Pett answered, Your Highness, I think you're mad." Rupert laughed at this and said, "Oh, I quite agree with you." The point that I'm making with this story, besides the anecdotal value of it, is that this could not have been a useless ship if she could maneuver down the river against the wind in restricted waters. Rupert could not have been anything but an outstanding sea officer if he could achieve it without running her aground. So, who are we to believe? Master Hendrik in the early 20th century, or Prince Rupert and the Dutch in the 17th century, who actually fought the ship, operated the ship, and encountered her on a daily basis? I know which one I would choose of the testimonies. You tell me what you like, and who do you believe? So, let's return to how did the ship come about. In the first half of the 17th century, a tendency that began in around the middle of the 16th century was still continuing, building ever bigger and more prestigious ships. In the early part of the 17th century, England was surrounded by enemies, as happened to be quite usually the case. The English Navy usually is represented as having lost its edge over others in comparison with what it had been under Elizabeth I. I personally doubt this very, very much. I think that this is pure mythology. But it is true that King Charles I wanted to re-establish the undisputable sovereignty of the English claim over the English Channel, to protect its coast, especially from the roaming Barbary pirates or corsairs, really, who were hunting through Ireland for slaves. And as part of the rebuilding of the Navy and expanding the royal power in this way, he decided to build another extremely large, prestigious ship that would become sovereign in the seas. This was intended to be as one up upon his father's Prince Royal of 1610. He turned to the same master shipwright, Phineas Pett, as he tells us in his autobiography. This is a late the original publication was by the Nautical Research Society. I only have a later reprint, but also this book is available online as a PDF format. So anyone can find it by simply Googling autobiography of Phineas Pett. Phineas Pett began his career in the later years of the 16th century. So technically he was an Elizabethan shipwright. But he continued and he lived until 1647. He built Prince Royal, a vessel that had incredible reputation and fairly successful and long career. It was lost in 1666 during the 4 days battle against the Dutch, because a ex-parliamentarian commander managed to run her on the galloper. And the ship could not be saved, so the Dutch burned her. He is renowned for two things. Obviously, he built that model, but he also constructed a model to show King James I and VI of Scotland what the ship would look like. This may very well be one of the earliest references that we have to ship models. Going on to sovereign the seas, in 1634, King Charles I, who was present at the launching of another ship that was recently rebuilt, called the master shipwright aside and said, "I need you to build me another ship. I want another large vessel." Initially, she was not supposed to be 100 guns, but in the process of construction and commissioning, she became the first true three-decker, 100-gun ship of the line ever constructed. Did Charles I know that he is changing the face of naval history? I doubt it. Probably not. It probably was more a question of prestige for him than practical reality. He did not have either the intelligence or the naval know-how of his son, King Charles II. Had this ship been ordered by Charles II, I would have said, oh yes, absolutely. Probably one of the most intelligent monarchs ever to sit on the English throne. As part of the order, Pitt, or rather Phineas Pett, tells us that he built a model of the ship, timber by timber. It was a frame model, unplanked, exactly as, quote unquote, as the real, I would build the real ship. That was displayed in Whitehall, so that the king and his court could admire the model. So this is the second reference that we have to ship models. Not one of these references, however, claims that this was done as part of the design process of the ship. No, not at all. These models were done purely for presentational purposes and no other purpose. Unfortunately, we do not have any of these models surviving to the present day. They have been lost, and they appear to have been lost as far back as the 17th century, probably. So, what information do we have about the vessel? Actually, quite substantial. First of all, we know the radii of the arcs that were used to create the midship bend of the ship, because Master Pett tells us so. And that is the starting point of any interpretation of what the ship would have looked like. Needless to say, the ship has attracted a lot of attention over the years. And one of the extremely good studies deals with the decoration. The vessel, not for no reason was it called the Golden Devil by the Dutch. She was heavily carved, she was heavily decorated. In fact, the carvings and decoration of the vessel cost a lot more than the construction of the ship itself. And of course, the second large cost was providing 100 bronze guns for her. Brass is not an inexpensive material, and because this was such a prestigious ship, all of it was made out of brass. This is a study by Hendrik Busmann, specifically on the decorations, specifically on the sculptures of the vessel. It is in German, which perhaps might be a challenge for some of the ship models, but to me, obviously it isn't. I think that this is one of the best possible studies of what the ship looked like. And you can see a more detailed page through the book up here on the SYSTER channel. So, personally, I would not begin building a model of this ship without access to Herr Busmann's book on it. When I am choosing a book, and when I decide whether a book is useful, is to be taken seriously, or it is just another popular scribbling, the first thing that I do is check the bibliography. That is an absolute dead giveaway. Whether the book was done by a scholar who was doing active research, or it is just rechewing and respitting old information out there, and it is just popular book. In this context, I recommend Sovereign of the Seas by James Sephton. The gentleman actually has done his research on the model. And let me show you what I really mean by this. Look at the bibliography. Primary sources, these are the state papers. Primary sources, paintings, drawings, and models, contemporary. These are the references to the actual archives. In other words, this book is based on primary research. The author of the book has gone through the trouble, has gone through the archives, has studied it in detail, and only after that has he started writing. So to me, this is a valuable book because of this. In terms for ship modelers, No, it is not giving you a recipe. It is not giving you everything drawn out to tell you, oh, this is how it should be. You have to do some of the work yourselves. He's providing some of the early drawings that we have that allegedly represent Royal Sovereign. I keep on changing the names between Sovereign of the Seas and Royal Sovereign. So let me take a break between the books now and explain why and how this comes about. When the ship was launched, she was called Sovereign of the Seas, because that was part of the philosophy of the time of mare clausum versus open seas policy that the Dutch supported, and as part of the defense of the closed seas, that they are under the control of the English monarchs. Therefore, any ship passing through these seas has to salute the English flag. And yes, English, not yet British. That is why the name of the ship was Sovereign of the Seas. It was stating the claim that since no one had such a powerful vessel, obviously I am the sovereign of the local seas. During the interregnum, the usurper, that is to say Oliver Cromwell's period, the sovereign part was just dropped. They did not officially rename the ship, but in all state documents from this period, she simply referred to as sovereign. Upon the restoration, again, we do not, as far as I'm aware, there is no document that states that the ship was renamed officially, but from there onwards, everywhere in all documents, she shows up under the name of Royal Sovereign. And as most of her active career passed under this name, Royal Sovereign, that's why I tend to prefer it. Naturally, with such an important ship, one of the few first-rate ships of the line, and for most of the 17th century, the largest ship in the Navy, she was outgrown only by Britannia of 1684. Until then, she was the biggest ship. So naturally, she has been a receiver of attention from artists, descriptions, etc. As usual, the most accurate drawings of the ship are the ones produced by the Willem van de Veldes, and specifically there is a fantastic drawing, very detailed, very accurate, detailed drawing by Willem van de Velde the Elder. What has happened with the original model, unfortunately, remains secret. In the 1880s, there was a report that a model was constructed of the ship and was kept on display in the Admiralty. However, that model is not original 17th century. It followed the style of the Restoration Navy Board models, but it was not built in that period. Set of drawings also exist that also appear to be a 19th century product, or, as it is implied, 19th century copy of an older drawing that existed once upon a time, but it no longer exists. So this is the real source of all the kits, all the books that are showing you the lines of the Sovereign of the Seas. The only firm documentation that we have are dimensions in the lists of ships that survived from the 17th century, and they do vary from year to year. And let's not forget that the ship was changed and rebuilt during her time, although until her burning in 1696, she was essentially, any changes to her were minor. But that is the limited information for which we have. As far as the midship shape of the vessel, the only solid information we have are the given rari in the autobiography of Phineas Pett. So, in this context, let's look a little bit at Sovereign of the Seas by John McKay. As with most McKay's works, the quality of the drawings is exceptional, and they're detailed, they're interesting. Maybe I will reach them eventually. They are no more accurate than any of the others. They're based on the same sources, and there are a number of places where I completely disagree with Mr. McKay on the construction of the vessel. One of this is the series of his framing patterns. I happen to disagree with the interpretation, but until we find a first-rate ship-of-the-line wreck from this period? It's anybody's guess. One of the interesting features with which I actually completely disagree, and it is based on only one source. Here he constructs the ship with square tuck, with a square stern. That I believe to be inaccurate. She would have had a round tuck like most English vessels in this period. His source for the square tuck of the vessel is actually a portrait of her builder Peter Pett. And I can hear you immediately telling me, whoa, 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 wait a second, boy. Until now you were talking about Phineas Pett, now you are mentioning Peter Pett. The thing is, Phineas is the man who designed the ship, but the man who actually put her together was his son, Peter Pett, who would have a long and illustrious career as a master shipwright for the Navy during the Commonwealth period, or rather the usurpers period, and of course subsequently after the Restoration, until just about 1664. And that portrait has been the subject of a number of studies, and eventually I will find it, I promise you, and I will show you what I mean. There has been long discussion out there. Here we go. You can see the dour expression, clearly Puritan, and down on the other side is the sovereign herself. Look carefully at the stern. In this instance, this is really where McKay is taking his evidence for the square stern of the vessel. But as Geoffrey Callender and other specialists who had studied the original paintings, who have studied the drawings, who have studied the later period of the vessel, and in comparison with the records that survive, they all agree that she was with a round tuck stern. Let's give another piece of evidence. As Pett writes in his autobiography, when the king pulled him aside to request him to build the sovereign of the seas, or rather the future sovereign of the seas, Pett was in the middle of the construction of Leopard in 1634. She was already framed in place, and the king had come to have a look. This is part of the ship money fleet. We have early portraits of Leopard before she was rebuilt, and Leopard undoubtedly had a round tuck to her stern. Therefore, it is extremely unlikely that while constructing a two-decker he would build it with a round tuck, but the following year, when he's beginning to build the Sovereign, he suddenly will revert to older style and building it with a square tuck. As far as the painting, how much of an evidence the painting is? Anderson, for one, Geoffrey Callender and others here, Salisbury, have argued that there is clear evidence on this painting of later retouching and changing. Probably as part of a restoration, ill-advised restoration attempt on the painting, and that it is really a shadow. On the original painting, it was a shadow being thrown by the round tuck that a later artist sharpened to the point where it seems to imply square tuck. None of the other pieces of evidence square with a square tuck. Ooh, that was a bad play of words. So these are the problems that I see with this book. I'm sure that people will use it to build yet another inaccurate model of Sovereign of the Seas. The drawings are fantastic. They really hold you by the hand, and they are like a cooking recipe, step-by-step drawing. By all means, why not use it? Just accept that this is only going to be a possible interpretation, and probably with significant inaccuracies. From the overlapping of the framing and the construction of the frames, here it is implied that they are double sawn frame construction, or you would think fastened to each other. Well, we know that this was not the way ships were built at the time. Thank you, archaeology. Thank you, more detailed and later studies. All the way to the square tuck. Again, the book is focusing mostly on the original look, 1637. If I were to build a model of her, I would have built her as she was in the 1660s and 1670s, because these really are the glorious years of the ship, in which she participated in a number of battles. They're all the way into the Dutch invasion of Dutch Willem van Oranje, the future King William III. These are the most interesting battles. This is the most interesting history of the ship. From 1637 until the beginning of the English Civil War, for all practical purposes, she did one cruise. She was tested, she was never in action. And during the English Civil War, obviously, the Royalists had minor naval forces. She was never mobilized. In the early stage, during the First Anglo-Dutch War, she did participate in some battles. Probably from then dates the nickname the Golden Devil, but she was way too expensive to maintain because she required a crew of nearly 1,000 men. So she had to be used sparingly in battle. Of course, one of her most famous actions were during the 1670s under the command of Admiral Prince Rupert. With this, I will bid you goodbye and hope to see you again. If you have any questions, any comments, by all means, do not hesitate. I would love to read them and do my best to answer them. So do I recommend the book? Upon the whole, yes. I mean, I bought it. But the weak spot of the book, as I have said before, is the bibliography. This is only secondary sources, no primary sources are quoted at all. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.